So we are at our Mochi Podcast number 26, and my guest today is Kevin McMahon, also known as Kevin Throbac of Throbac Labs. Kevin, thank you for being my guest. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, cool. I am curious as to how bad the delay is right now.
Yeah, I can hear you. There's a little bit of a delay, but it's nice. It'll just be like we're having like one of those awkward in between two ferns conversations at some points.
Or a very, very slow Zoom convo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, so for those unaware, right now I'm currently back in the States. I've had to downgrade briefly to be able to do this on the go, but good to be back in Chicago. Kevin, you're also from Chicagoland. You're from Illinois.
hmm Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of Chicago connections in the Mochi community. I guess makes sense, Gabe.
Yeah. So what is so you know Gabe from college. What has kind of been like your interaction
hmm
with like Web3 stuff and the crypto space, I guess?
Um, well, I bought the top in 2017, like a lot of people, and
Mm,
lost a couple $1,000s. And I was, I was interested in all of it, but I was just too busy, doing what I was doing at the time, and started getting a little bit more into it because I had a friend who was into it in late 2019, and basically right when COVID hit, the limited I knew about crypto, it seemed to me that like basically every giant societal narrative force was uh like wind in the sails of crypto. Like it addressed a lot of the things that I felt like were happening, whether or not it was going to address them successfully. It was in the conversation,
hmm
at least as I saw it. And so I kind of just went down the rabbit hole, like learning, reading, listening to as much stuff as I could just to try and make sense of it because I don't have a finance background. I don't have a computer science background. I consider myself like an amateur history buff, and I'm definitely interested in economics, and I would call myself an entrepreneur as well. So, from the business side, but there were all these different modalities that I had really no idea on. So evaluating stuff was hard. So I spent probably 6 or 8 months every minute I wasn't working. I was reading crypto stuff, and then I finally felt like I kind of had somewhat of a perspective on it. And yeah, I mean, about a year ago, I decided to go full time and start Throbac Labs. It's just I couldn't scratch my interest, doing what I was doing before. So yeah.
So what are you building a Throwback Labs to be? Because I know that you've done a validator roadmap for setting up like a Solana validation node,
hmm
which I'm very curious
Yep.
about because the only thing I've ever really learned about like with blockchain is like Ethereum blockchain, and I know like I've got a rough idea of like the
hmm
Bitcoin, but I don't know anything about Solana, and so yeah, anything about like your business and kind of like uh what you've been working on, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Throwback is really interesting because it's like a vehicle for me to kind of understand what type of business I would want. Like I decided, I worked at a small business before. I was a partner in it, but I wasn't a founding partner. Um, and I wanted something that from the genesis was like made with intention, by me and any close partners that I had. And he you learn pretty quick, like from your past experiences, like what things you don't want, and that's kind of how Throwback has been governing itself thus far. I think in as far as crypto businesses are concerned, I was really interested in infrastructure. I felt like it was a good way to understand better how all of this stuff works and then be able to make better decisions about how I feel about it, what I think the sustainability of these different systems are, and what's bullshit and what's not.
Hmm.
And so, at the basic infrastructure level that you have, block producers. So in Bitcoin, that's miners. In proof of stake system, that's validators.
Hmm.
And they come in different flavors in different blockchains, but that's the base level of it. And not having a computer science background, I had some friends around me who did. And the cool thing about infrastructure is, as opposed to like doing DevOps at a Fortune 500 company or some big enterprise, you're doing it for a small amount of machines because everybody else is doing it. Like you have the 100 or 1,000 different people doing it, right? So you're only responsible for your infrastructure. So the level of knowledge that you need is a lot lower. The barrier to entry is a lot lower to get in and start doing this. And my understanding of it was there's work on the setup side, but once it's set up, you sort of have to kick the machine to make sure it's running, but it's in some ways passive. So for me, it felt like a good direction to start with Throbac. This thing that was potentially profitable. There was work on the front end, but it was also work that's like helping you learn how this stuff actually works. And if you can get it going, then it sort of forms the base level to the business. And it's not something that like you necessarily have to scale. Like I think for me, my ideal business in whatever it is we're doing is like a squad of 3 to 5 full-time, really committed, flat sort of hierarchy, and then a federated extended group of people that come in for project-based work.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily, at least at this time, want to run a company. It seems like a lot. uh, and I just think in I'm not a great manager. I like to do my thing. I like to work with people, but the idea of like boss has never appealed to me. I've never worked inside of a big company myself, so I wouldn't even know what I was doing,
Hmm.
in the first place. And so the validator business seemed to fit that mold, and then you know just doing DevOps is not enough to kind of scratch my itch. I consider myself a creative, and one of the things I did like about what I did before was I got to do a little bit of everything. And so the other side of Throwback is like an agency style business, for lack of a more concrete definition. We do project based work. I saw that there was a little bit of a gap between crypto people who don't know so much about culture and culture people who don't know so much about crypto. And when I say culture, I mean like music, entertainment,
Hmm.
arts, whatever. And so that is a lot more amorphous. It's mostly just been like me and the people who are helping me with it, having conversations with people who are trying to, flesh out their marketing plan if they're crypto people, or do events, or if they're brands, like how do we enter into crypto, and us just kind of feeling out what feels right, and taking on work that we find interesting, most of it coming through a crypto lens just because that's like the air that we're breathing every day.
Hmm. How big is the team right now?
It's myself and two others, and then we have a couple other people who are closely involved, but yeah, not full time.
When you say so, like infrastructure and setting up infrastructure in order for like the to be as validators, what does that look different? So are you primarily working on like the Ethereum blockchain, or are you like as part of like the validator roadmap thing that you've done two podcasts about?
Mhm.
Is there what does like infrastructure look like? I guess on a different blockchain if you're not using the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah. I mean, it, at the highest level, it's pretty much the same idea.
Hmm.
You have the blockchain itself, which is just a giant database, and then you have some software that is, either proposing blocks to that database or verifying that database as it comes along, making
dispersed among
attestations that
dispersed among
a
like
bu-
all the people who decide to want to become validators and then are verifying all of the different information that different people
right.
using the blockchain are going to be entering.
Yeah. And I would say probably the main difference between how most proof of stake systems work and how Ethereum is going to work is like, so Ethereum is not a delegated proof of stake system, right? Like you need 32 ETH
Hmm.
and then you can run a single validator.
This is when it
And
comes to
you
proof of
have
stake. Yeah.
services like, and so you have like services like Lido and all of these things that you can technically delegate to, but like on a real fundamental technical level, they're just taking your ETH and they're setting up a 32 ETH validator and they're setting up a bunch of
Yeah.
32 ETH validators, right? Because that's how it works. Whereas other systems, you set up one validator, people can delegate to you, so you can get a giant pool of capital, and then that becomes your stake. And in any of the systems, you're basically making an interest rate based off of the stake that you have.
Hmm.
And so that's a thing that I learned early on in doing this, is that like uh, it's a capital game, and so it kind of forces you, like, my own personal opinion, I would love to just focus on Ethereum and a couple other chains that I find interesting. But if you actually want to make a business out of this and you don't have like a giant bag of Ethereum or a giant bag of, take your pick of the blockchain, like you sort of need to spread yourself pretty wide and try and interact with new projects that are bringing new blockchains online.
Hmm.
Because if you don't get in early, you need a large amount of capital to make it work, because your interest rates on mature blockchains are in the 4 to 8% range. And so, you can do the math on the amount of capital you need to be generating enough to employ a
Hmm.
few different people, right? So that's an interesting problem, and it's also something that like is a lot of what I've been trying to do. It has like an ideological bent to it, because I got into crypto because I was drinking the narrative Kool-Aid, right? Like independence, transparency, like all of these, financial freedom,
Hmm.
equality, all of these things that crypto like really sells you hard on. But then you look at systems like proof of stake, which is basically, whoever has the most capital determines the state of the system. Like
Hmm.
that's what proof of stake means, which is kind of how our world already works, right? So like the only way in which, from my view, that it can be, materially better from the highest aspirations of crypto level, is if there's a really distributed, robust network of validators,
Hmm.
um, across the world, and the stake is somewhat equitably distributed. And right now, the pretty much the exact opposite is happening, as you can imagine. So I've sort of started working with a bunch of other independent validators to do some advocacy around this, because it's kind of the thing that people don't want to talk about. Like people don't want to talk about the fact that Coinbase stake controls 10% of the Ethereum network,
Hmm.
and you can, there's a litany of other examples on other chains. There's really no proof of stake system that does it super well, which kind of makes sense. Like you need to be an engineer to think about the idea that, like, if your system runs on money, money tends to centralize in the hands of the people who have money.
Yeah. And so as an alternative, Solana, it's I read about it like a week or two ago in preparation for this and completely forgot. It's switched to like proof of or the alternative is it's like proof of compute, or is like proof of
It's funny, they have a word for it, and I can't even remember it off the top of my head right now. But I mean, it's still at its core, it's a proof of stake system. They have some uh, like sub activities within their transaction architecture that has like another proof of something
mhm.
uh, involved in it. But it's a delegated proof of stake system. Um, You can delegate to validators. Those validators approve blocks. Whoever has, if you have 30% of stake, it's not deterministic, but the odds are you're going to produce about 30% of the blocks.
Hmm.
And that's the same way, all of the systems work. The main difference between Solana and other chains is it's just way more computationally intense. So like Ethereum's trying to scale with all of these layer twos and pushing, certain transactions off of the main chain. And Solana is trying to scale with a bunch of people around the world running really high powered hardware.
Hmm. And the Solana, it has like a much higher, it's got a much higher transactions per minute um, at its base level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of goes to the earliest days of like what the arguments people were having about trade-offs in blockchains, like the block wars in Bitcoin, big blocks versus small blocks. Small blocks means you have a smaller chain, somebody can run it on their laptop or their PC. uh, a big blocks means you have a bigger chain, which means you need a more high powered machine. um, there's idiosyncrasies in there, but like that's the general premise. And for me, like, considering all of this stuff is unproven, I feel like pretty much only Bitcoin at this point. Like I super am like, yeah, that makes sense and is proven is right. And I don't know if it's good, but it's right. Like I think that um, proof of work as it manifests in Bitcoin like works and is sustainable and is very very hard to co-opt. Um, I think proof of stake, like as soon as you make that transition, it's really a spectrum. I think Ethereum has, the only chance, in my view, at being like a really distributed sort of small block kind of chain just because it has enough users.
Hmm.
I think everybody else is going to make trade-offs for speed and cheapness. And what is the right balance? If you ask me sitting here today, like, do I think there's space for something a little more centralized but a little more usable in the way that the sort of the world is? Like, yeah, I do think that that's true. And so I think that somebody who chooses like a different design purposefully than Ethereum, I don't know that it'll actually work, but I think it has a better chance of working than somebody who's like just copying exactly what Ethereum is doing
Hmm.
and with slight changes and trying to amass a new user base.
Gotcha. We said Bitcoin and the proof of work right now is like the most. So it's not the most good, but it is right in this. And you mentioned that it is sustainable.
It works.
Uh huh. But isn't that also still part of like the issue? Doesn't that create a lot of like the problems around like centralizing, um, all of like the majority of like new blocks into people with massive like GPU farms, and who like the people who are able to invest in that?
For sure. That's definitely true. But my personal opinion is that it's factually like it's different for someone to have a certain percentage of the hash power
Hmm.
in the Bitcoin network versus somebody having a certain percentage of the coins of the ownership in a proof of stake network, right? So, like
Uh
for
huh.
example, when China decided to outlaw Bitcoin, right, and shut down all of the miners, China was like 40 to 60% of hash power, and it went offline in a span of like 3 or 4 weeks, right?
Hmm.
And that didn't nuke the Bitcoin chain. It wasn't like, oh, the Bitcoin chain can't operate. The difficulty adjustment went down, hash power redistributed itself, and that's
Hmm.
and the Bitcoin chain didn't skip a beat, right? Like the security was still high enough that nobody could like co-opt the chain or anything like that. And so I think it would be very hard to amass 51% of the hash power needed to do that, even if you have these mining pools, right? And even if you did, you still only control the chain for that period of time. There'll still be like sort of competing forks, and at the end of the day, like you don't own the coins. I personally I believe there's a fundamental difference between hash power, which can move at any moment, and like somebody actually owning the coins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, capital versus energy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's how I think about it.
Interesting. So like shifting gears, you said you didn't really have like a background in technology, in coding, programming. What was your area of study before? You've got like a bunch of like podcast stuff set up, and I had found that
Yeah.
you'd done some stuff. You'd done like some music production or like music writing previously.
hmm Yeah, I helped run a music publication called Consequence of Sound for about 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I started as an editorial intern there, and then by the end of it, I was the vice president of creative and strategy, I guess was my title. So what that actually meant is I was doing a lot of content concepting, production, and execution, and I was handling uh, publisher business model. If you're not familiar, it's kind of like a Pitchfork or a Rolling Stone
Mm-hmm.
type of publication. So content is definitely my background. I've, yeah, I've made pretty much every flavor of it you can imagine. And so uh, one of the things that I was doing as I was getting started with Throwbac, I kind of felt like if I was willing to be like vulnerable and honest about what I don't know, that might be a helpful journey to document for people who are making the same passage now or later.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where the idea for Validator Roadmap came in, being like kind of a warts and all look at what it takes to actually do this, because a lot of blockchains will tell you, oh, anybody can do this, our documentation is super easy, you don't even need to really have a computer science background, blah blah blah. And so it's kind of like a testing of that, and you know uh, trying to be candid with people about like what it's taking me to do it, and doing it in a way not like after I've done it, doing it very much like in progress. Because it's like I can remember when I taught myself to play music, right? Like the way you feel about learning a specific thing is very different in the moment than when you look back on it
Mm-hmm.
after a year or 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, do you have what other kind of like steps are you looking at, kind of documenting, I guess, as you are both in your developing business and I guess in like creating more of this infrastructure for your company?
Well, I'm talking with the Solana Foundation about doing more stuff, kind of broadening the universe of Validator Roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of it is like even just being a noob and like looking at the way words are used, like the kind of language that's used in crypto, and like how that's described to people. I think that there's most of the stuff that is out there, learning resources and stuff are very clearly written by engineers for engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's definitely space in almost every blockchain for more like education style stuff. Um, that it's sort of like my plan is to document pretty much everything that I do,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll see how much of it is actually useful.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely always really helpful to see people who aren't who aren't already experts in it, like kind of developing that expertise. Um,
hmm
and that it's very reassuring, especially because like I'm so like in Mochi where there are a lot of people who are like at the forefront of like knowing what's going on in the blockchain. They're ultra plugged in, or are like the people who are developing and creating like the most new stuff. And then there's like people like me who are just kind of around it, watching and kind of getting a feel for it without having the most technical knowledge, or knowing all the terminology and stuff.
hmm
And like seeing also proof of concept come from people developing businesses, and uh, really diving in, seeing how that happens is definitely like a very valuable thing. And I think one of the things that we kind of want to develop in Mochi on like the content side is like a Mochi magic series of like, how do you get into sustainably minting NFTs, or how do you like prepare your crypto recovery plan in case something happens to you, or like making all these new things. It's super
Mhm.
informative, and like community education, like I think that's one of the best things like with these communities that aren't necessarily 100% focused on like a technology, but like it has a lot of people with the broad strokes of expertise, to for the people who want to learn about it, they can kind of learn through it either osmosis or through actual discussion and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like, what you're touching on is what it makes me think of is like curation, right? It's
Hmm.
like a big parallel I see between my past life and my current life is like what music publications were when I started was like, like in the blog era and whatever, was like there's this fire hose of music that's available, and how do you kind of know where to go? Like you need a source that if you're not a person who's you know decided I'm going to be in the trenches every day doing this,
Hmm.
uh, you need a source that you can trust to sort of guide you so that you, with the time that you have, can meaningfully participate in this thing that you're interested in, right? And so for us, that was, deciding, hey, this is some stuff you might want to listen to if you're into these kinds of things. And in the crypto space, it's I think even more important now because those travel lanes, those highways are not built in the same way they are in like the media and content space now, 15 plus years into social media and all of that.
Hmm.
So it's like I remember the first 6 months, I was just flailing. I was like listening to every podcast I could and doing all these things. And I think that
To be fair, I think that's
as
like where
like
everybody was kind of floating.
for sure. But I think that there's like a multitude of lives that you can live within crypto. And I think some of them are starting to, uh, sort of the concrete is starting to harden a little bit. And the nice thing about that is those different tracks you can sort of chart those journeys and you can lay it out a little bit more concisely for people who are trying to get in, and that's how more people are able to get in.
Hmm.
That's how it feels more approachable, because I think that a personal opinion I have also is like I think engineer minded people like revel in that like Mad Max style chaotic information space, and they're like, you must climb the mountain yourself, and if you don't, like, you don't deserve it or whatever. And I think that's like just the dumbest viewpoint that you could have. And so, I think Mochi does a great job of like picking and be like, hey, this is the kind of stuff, like if you're trying to participate in this is what you should be thinking about.
Hmm.
And here's like how you would do that or learn more about it.
So you're saying like engineers are like the gunslingers and like panhandlers of the crypto world right now.
Yeah, and of course it's not a monolith. There's people of all shades and stripes, but I look at it from like, as somebody who is really dedicated trying to figure this out, what kind of energy am I receiving from people and also from like the information, how it's written, where it is, all of this stuff. That very much feels like a part of the ethos.
Hmm.
Um, and part of that is you just it takes time to find your tribe, and I'm starting to have a little bit more of a core group of people who do similar things in this space that I can talk to and and values aligned with.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely say like in terms of kind of like the feeling of like from an outsider looking into like the what the crypto space has kind of developed, and it's very much like what you said. It kind of felt like engineers were just like digging wherever they could to find the gold, and
Hmm.
those holes could get deeper, and if people wanted to jump in, you had to dive into pretty deep holes to catch up with the people who had already been prospecting for like the past year. And now it definitely feels like we're trying to transition into like putting down some like nice uh putting down some saloons and brothels and like places for people to actually start building up societies
Right.
and infrastructure and communities. And like even though some of those are still like trying to figure out how to not get the sheriff shot every 3 days, um, there is a lot more of
Right.
that community building in it's like right now a lot of them feel disparate, like with like different DAOs. There's a lot of like lack of communication between the two. But I think the fact that everybody's kind of now seeing how everybody else is doing and like building communities and trying to build better communities, I think that is also helping get more people into comfortable spaces, and also more spaces that are more equitable in terms of information and capital.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that analogy a lot. And it's like, um, I'm really glad to have Mochi in my life, especially as somebody who's trying to make a living in crypto, doing it full time, because it can be super disillusioning. But it's like what Mochi is building is, uh, I don't know, it feels like a positive like look at what this stuff can be, because like really what we're trying to do is like we're trying to meme a new way of doing things into existence. Like there is no reason
Did you say?
really.
Did you say we're trying to
Um,
meme it into existence?
yeah, I mean I think that's really what it is. Like we're trying to like signal
Hmm.
and like the original crypto meme hodl. Like we're
Totally. Yeah.
trying to uh, invent these these things that like when people ask you like, well, Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's not backed by anything. And that's actually like I think that that's like really a true statement. It's backed by the beliefs of people, which like you can get into an everything and is everything thing real quick and say everything is like that. But I do think that like these things are only 10 years old. We like the ideas that go along with them, and we're just trying to like cling to those ideas and try to uh, amass enough inertia that it can grow into something like real and big enough to be like a large societal force, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that there is a distinct possibility that like as it gets larger, you will always have like these subculture, like I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but it's like the countercultural movements of like the 60s and 70s, right?
Hmm.
Like they fizzled out, and the people who are really committed ended up like starting communes and shit like that, right? And like my hope is that that's not how crypto ends, where you have these like hyper technical fucking communes of people who like made a bunch of money and they do their own little weird shit, because the blockchain will always be available for the people who know how to like write directly to it to do whatever they want. But that's not going to be the normal person.
Hmm.
And the sort of broad spectrum is like from that possible endpoint to like an endpoint that is I think a lot of the values that Mochi espouses, like that taking a little bit more of a mainstream hold and finding like how do we apply the tools and the possibilities of this technology in a way that is materially different from
Hmm.
what already exists.
How much do you think we've gotten so far? How far do you think we managed to get away from people strictly seeing crypto as like alternative dollar signs, and are actually starting to see them more, trying to see like blockchains and like altcoins and stuff as actual like resources and building spaces, as opposed to just like places to like mine and flip energy for like the next the next bandwagon.
Um, Unfortunately, this is where I'm a little bit pessimistic. I don't think we've gotten very far at all. I think
uh,
that
I feel like NFTs
to
right now,
you
that's
know
that's like
the
the
amount of
newest gold mine thing.
right. I mean, I think that the amount of people like to go back to your Wild West metaphor, like the town has gotten bigger for
Hmm.
sure, but the people who are outside of the town, I think still like, and rightfully so, look at it as like it's a giant casino, it's whorehouses, it's all of that. Um, I think that that's still like by and large, especially with the giant run up and crash of the past, 18 months
Hmm.
or so. Um, so, underneath that, like what's actually starting to take hold, I think people are really excited about DAOs. I think that it'll be interesting to see. Like, I was having this conversation a couple weeks ago with some fellow crypto folk about like what I think the actual like guaranteed or in my mind guaranteed like uh advancement of crypto is, like
Hmm.
things that we can count on, like not being co-opted or whatever, a thing that it actually does. Um, and right now, really, the only thing that I can say with certainty is like velocity. I think that's like
Uh-huh.
velocity of money, velocity of value. I think that's the one thing that crypto absolutely does better than what currently
Yeah.
exists. Um, and so, like, that's great for economic activity. It's great for small businesses. Like the fact that you can, whip up a multi sig in a DAO, and like that's infinitely cheaper and less messy than like starting an LLC. I think that's something that can, extrapolate into the future positively. But I think it all, in my mind, like most things go back to velocity,
Hmm.
which is cool, but if all we're doing is like efficiency of money and value, it's a lot different than like the narrative that was attractive to me when I first got into it.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely see that. Like there are a lot of people who are like they're kind of like interested in crypto. They're kind of stoked on it, but at the same time, there's like I also agree with like the fact that most people are still focused on just like how much they can how much return on investment they can kind of get from being involved in the crypto space, and they let that like either distract them or like they're focused on it too much to the point where the cultural shifts that are happening and like the cultural like steering that's happening by certain people with money that are actually trying to manipulate culture using the new technology. I feel like that's sliding through more because people right now are still focused on like uh, how much more capital can we amass in a shorter period of time, you know, without consequence, without caring about consequence for what actually is happening in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's like utility,
Mm-hmm.
like velocity is attractive to the people who can take advantage of velocity. Most people, can't take advantage of the velocity until like much further down the, value extraction curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like especially in the early days of something that is like velocity focused, um, until you have like a good reason why somebody should, because everybody's attention is grabbed 24/7, right? So until you can give people who aren't, necessarily interested in velocity something that is usably like demonstrably like a reason for them to divert their attention from whatever dumb thing they're doing to like this other dumb thing that's a little bit cooler than the dumb thing that they
Mm-hmm.
were doing before, you know um and that is actually one space where I'm relatively like bullish on crypto. Is that like I think crypto, one of the things that crypto does well is humor, like I think that uh there's not a lot of like movements like this that start that are so humorous,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like are so have such a culture of humor and of self-deprecation and all of those things. And I think those characteristics are really good and necessary for long-term adoption.
Mm-hmm. um so switching gears to
Mhm.
in terms of like journey stuff you've kind of been working on, so you've been focused mostly on like at least with work been developing a Throbac Labs and the Validator Roadmap stuff. You in your bio stuff you mentioned you've been doing health and wellness stuff. you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my first journey, I was like, I think I misinterpreted like how, at least for me, how journeys can be most useful. And so I did like, oh, something I was already doing. So I was like coding for 3 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like just trying to teach myself. So I made that my thing. And I found that it didn't like really enhance the experience. And then like in days where I wasn't able to get to it, I had like this weird dissonance. And I felt like the people who had more bite-sized goals, more like daily reminders, more like mindfulness stuff, um, that to me just like felt like it would be a stronger interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd started having some neck pain, just because I fucking work all the time and I sit at a desk, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And so I went, and I've had it before, and then I've like, just dealt with it, and then stopped dealing with it, and then it has come back or whatever. And so I got these exercises from a physical therapist. It's like 5 or 10 minutes of stuff to do a day,
Mm-hmm.
and so I did that. And yeah, I found that like really useful. And even now, as like I've been doing technically the same journey for 3 times in a row. It's shifted from like, hey, do this thing for 5 to 10 minutes, as to like a daily reminder to like I'm talking to you standing up. I'm not sitting, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
doing these things that I know like add mobility, and are just like a general kind of vibe of health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Is like what Mochi means to me right now, and yeah, I've really enjoyed it for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of flip flop between doing. I've tried at this point. I think a wide range of journey types. I've done a bit of
Mm,
exercise, a bit of like language learning, a bit of like trying to be creative, like
mm,
writing and stuff. Um, and I would say like for me at least like the physical stuff has been a little bit easier as long as it's just like something I can do at home. I can step away from the computer and do it. If I need to go to the
mm-hmm,
gym, that's a problem. Uh, Same thing with like language stuff.
mm-hmm.
If I need to like go to an office and like study there for like an hour, that's too much. But if I can just like pull up my Duolingo, uh, it's way more attainable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's where you just reminded me. I think that's where I'm gonna go next. Some language stuff. I'm trying. So my girlfriend is Greek,
Mm-hmm.
um, and she just got her Greek citizenship.
Oh, that's
We're
cool.
going to visit her family for the second time. Um, so I'm gonna make a concerted effort to learn Greek. Yeah.
What do you have any idea? Is Greek like related to or what languages are Greek kind
I,
of like close to now? Modern
I think
Greek, I
it's a
guess.
Latin language.
Uh huh.
Um, yeah, I mean it's probably got some similarities with Turkish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in some Middle Eastern languages, like they do have some like of the like sounds
Uh huh.
in their speech, but the way it's written, yeah, I would say Greek. It kind of looks like Russian in some of the characters, but I don't know.
Like
It
Cyrillics, you
feels
mean?
pretty distinct. What?
Like Cyrillics, in appearance, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, hmm yeah. But yeah, I'm not a master linguist, so I would say the ones that I'm somewhat familiar with, it feels like relatively distinct. It's not really spoken
Uh huh. What other languages do you
many
speak?
places outside of Greece. Sorry.
What other languages do you speak, or have you experienced with?
Uh, Spanish. As much as 4 years of high school can give you,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like the tiniest amount of German and French.
So mostly just like the European languages,
Yeah.
like offered through high school.
Yep. hmm
What do you kind of
Do you speak? Go ahead.
no, sorry, go on.
I was gonna ask if you have learned Ukrainian or Russian
I am working
um,
on
in your
Ukrainian.
time there.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so like I finally started meeting with a tutor, and
hmm
God, Ukrainian is an absolute monster to learn. The alphabet, I would
I'm
say, is the
sure.
easy part. Um, but like you know how in like Spanish there are like conjugations depending on like gender, number of people you're talking to, past tense, future tense.
Right.
Uh, all of that like
Yeah.
it changes the core words of a lot of words in Ukrainian. And like right now,
Oh.
I think
Oh wow.
I'm simultaneously trying to learn vocabulary and grammar, um, in a way that's like
Mm.
I'm not able to like piece together naturally language rules, and I'm still trying to like amass enough vocabulary to know if I need to be changed. What's a noun? What's a verb? What's an adjective? Because so many words are
Mm-hmm.
just like are so long. Like in order to say uh, goodbye, it's a do побачення. Uh, and like
Yeah.
the number system is it gets pretty wonky also. I learned a little bit of Chinese also because I
Mm.
lived in China before I moved to Ukraine. Um, and Chinese seems
Mm.
straightforward to me, aside from the amount of like memorization that needs to go into it because each of the characters is representative of a different word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my interactions with Greek thus far is like it feels somewhat approachable
Mm-hmm,
in that like the amount of time that it would take to get to like a general baseline of words and you can interact, ask for directions and
mm-hmm,
pleasantries feels like relatively low. There's a lot of like formality and informality in it and like the way people greet each other and things that people say to each other,
mm-hmm,
which I guess goes for a lot of languages, but it feels to me more like it's the same words, the same set of words being used a lot. At
mm-hmm.
least that's what I was saying in the last time I went over there. We were over there for 3 weeks and we spent a lot of time with her family, who live on like the Aegean side of Greece.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
but we'll see.
I can't say I know much about Greece, like beyond kind of like what happened the the eurozone stuff and like the what happened with like Greek bonds.
Right.
Beyond
Yeah.
that and like Homer,
Mhm.
I have no other knowledge of like
Right.
what's been going on in Greece.
Yeah. What happened in the middle? There was the time of Aristotle and Socrates, and then there was like the Euro debt crisis and everything in between. Who knows?
Yeah,
A
it's
lot of a lot of fights with Turkey.
which is fascinating because like Greece, like Greek philosophers and like the Greek religion and and pantheons and like history and lore is so like significant to Western culture, and yet like I
Mhm.
don't know shit about the country since then.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. I don't know. I feel like they're I don't know, like, right now, I'm in, I'm in the, like, Napoleonic era. I've been doing a lot of, there's this podcast that I follow. I've been doing some reading about that, so that's kind of, where I'm seeing things, like, so I don't, like, I guess, industrial age Europe and beyond, I don't know very, very much about other than, like, obviously World War II stuff, things that we
Mhm.
learned in school and whatnot. But I mean, back around that time, it was like I think mostly the Ottomans, right, and like the Holy Roman Empire a little bit.
And the
But even
Byzantines,
back then, I feel like Greece was basically the Middle East. It feels like at
hmm.
least like it was very much not Europe in that period of time.
Which is also interesting because it had a lot of like significant trade routes, at least in history.
Right.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
I definitely this was like an area of study that in like high school that I got almost zero of. Um, like right now, the only European history I'm learning is like through my wife that talking about like Ukraine in its history. Um, because
Hmm.
there's like a long there's like a long history of like this conflict that's going on with Russia right now. That's like this has been a long grievance that's been uh, pushed for uh, however many millennia at this point. Um, and
Uh-huh.
just like I never really got to like learn too much about like feudalism in Europe, how borders changed, how languages kind of moved over, and I feel like that's something
Hmm.
that the only way that as an adult you're gonna kind of learn about it is like through like 10-minute YouTube videos, podcasts, or like you're sitting through a history channel. You,
Right.
you just left History Channel on while you're doing other work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like the Napoleonic era is basically like the death of feudalism, right? Like he just went around Europe just like uh, flipping that on its head and creating like the modern capitalist state that we know today, basically. Um, yeah, it waffled back and forth a few times since then, but I mean that's kind of what that period was, the transition from feudalism to you know whatever sort of fascist capitalism we have today.
Oligarchy,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, yeah. So yeah, it touches on like the way things were, but it feels like things were so low level, like we're in, we the only history we're taught is like the world of like massive geopolitics and nation states and from that
Hmm.
time onward, and I think it's hard, at least for me, to even conceptualize a time when things were like pretty decentralized, right? Like
Hmm.
just because infrastructure was not there and you had like even like I think we look at like diasporas as like at least Americans for sure as like super monolithic, right? Like
Hmm.
the French are the French and the Greeks are the Greeks, and and so on and so forth. And like even we were talking about ancient Greece. I mean, ancient Greece wasn't Greece, right? You had
Hmm.
these you had like provinces, you had the Athenians, and you had the Peloponnesians, and you had all of these different uh, sometimes like very warring factions,
Hmm.
um, with different principles and beliefs and all of those things.
The Egyptians simultaneously too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Mm.
it's I guess kind of frustrating that like how much of history is like preserved or is really kind of only taught out of like a handful of books, for like
Mhm.
the larger population. Like, you know, pretty much everything you learn in about Greece is in like the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then like some of like the Socratic plays or whatever. And
Right.
then like everything you learn about kind of
Yeah.
the Middle East and like parts of Northern Africa are like they just come from the Bible. And I don't know how much of it was like
Right.
book burning in between like the events happening and then the
Yeah.
like mass
The
imperialism.
negative effects of curation, to
Yeah.
bring it back to that. Right? Like, yeah, it's like when you talk about history, and it's like, I mean, history is like the entire history of human civilization, right? It's like
Hmm.
everything everywhere. Um, so you have to make some edits, like, but it's like, what is the right story, and giving people some autonomy over the story that they choose to like inherit.
Hmm.
Um,
I think
you
I'm
know, and
comfortable
and the
burning.
the
I think I'm comfortable burning the book of Dogecoin. I think that one can.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we can leave that to the annals of history. The summary can just be some dumbass Elon tweet, and you can just leave it there.
Yeah. What do you
One line.
what do you think about Elon Musk like buying Twitter?
Mm. Um, I mean, I don't think it's good. Uh, I think that what I think about when I think about that is I think that like there's no possible way that he can run all of those companies well. Like
Hmm.
I don't care how much of a superhuman he is. Like you end up, I'm reading The Power Broker right
Hmm.
now. Uh have you read it?
I have not. You said, yeah, you
Are you
mentioned it
familiar with it?
in your bio. It's about Robert Moses.
Yeah, Robert Moses. If you're uh are you
I am
familiar
person
with
I am
Moses?
personally not familiar, and we can
Okay.
also go
So
about this
Robert
like we're
Moses
talking for
is
the
like
listener.
yeah, to yeah, sure. So Robert Moses was this builder uh in New York City in the like early mid 20th century. He worked in public works, but was not an elected official. He was an appointed official, and he basically, through power games, amassed more power than any elected official,
Hmm.
mostly through his building of parks and highways and things that the public use. So like he would get things done and enjoyed like for most of his career like the support of the public, and he was a populist in that like he would wield the support of the public to crush his enemies basically.
Hmm.
um, and the reason I bring him up in the context of Elon is like this dude was like a Napoleon, like any of these people who he was relatively pious himself. His interest was in power, in achievement, in making things and being like a great man of history type
Hmm.
of deal, right? And would sacrifice all else, would work 18 19 hours a day every day and could run on low sleep and all of the things that you hear. But even somebody doing that, like he got to a place in the 30s where he sort of reached the apex of his power and was living at that power level for decades. But there were so many things under his purview, and people like this are notorious micromanagers, right?
Hmm.
Napoleon was this way too, and you just factually cannot. You start glossing over details and you start making decisions based on assumptions that are on faulty ground, and the information that you start getting fed when you're at that level of power for that long starts deteriorating because you surround yourself with yes men, or you don't know how to properly vet your circle
Hmm.
because you have so much power. It's like a common trope, and I feel like Elon is now starting to enter that era where like he's obviously been doing this shit for a long time, but I think like the level of power and fame and public opinion that he enjoys today is probably only been a thing for the last 5 to 10 years.
Hmm.
I would say, as he's become like a celebrity CEO who still does shit. Um, and so I guess I'm being long winded, but I think when I think about the Twitter thing specifically, I just think that I can't imagine him really doing anything other than like loosening the free speech controls that they have in place, which just makes Twitter a more chaotic zone, and maybe he allows you to curate your feed a little bit more.
Hmm.
I don't know that it'll be like a material difference for Twitter. um, I think, and I'll pose this question back to you. I think the more interesting question is like, what do you think of Elon Musk? Because I feel like what you think about Elon Musk is like what you think about a lot of things, especially like mega trends in our society.
Um, I definitely think he's not like a full on egomaniac, but he's kind of an egomaniac. Um,
Absolutely.
but at the same time, like I think it's fine to be an egomaniac, in the sense that like he's very much not trying to hide a ton of it. I think with like the acquisition of Twitter, like it is high profile news. It's like kind of a big deal, but he's like at the very least, it doesn't seem like he's trying to like hide a ton of shit because like Twitter is such like a
Hmm.
big it's such like a big exchange for like ideas and like shit posting and memes and stuff. But then like there's like Wall Street Journal and all these things that are like owned by like Bloomberg or by like mega corporations. And how many of those like places have consolidated so much power, but without nearly as much transparency or visibility or like accountability to the public.
Right.
At least at least Tesla stocks dip a shitload when Elon Musk posts things, which is also not super infrequent. Um, like I feel like there should still
Yeah.
be that kind of like visibility and accountability, like actual consequence when a billionaire does a thing, as opposed to like when they can kind of do it in the dark and hide behind so many layers of obfuscation, uh, letting them just kind of manipulate things kind of in the shadows. This actually, I think I kind of wanted to ask with about the power broker thing. So, how much of like the consolidation of power kind of involved organized crime also? Because New York is one of those places that just like it's part of the backbones that like you can't, not you can
Actually,
disassociate.
surprisingly little thus far. Um, there was like, so any big democratic machine, city politics is like full of like patronage jobs and stuff like that.
Mhm,
But beyond patronage jobs, which are like, that's just like a part of doing business in politics. Like, you have to convince people to vote your way.
mhm,
Um, there's not like I said, he was a pretty pious dude. Like he got his way because he had the public's support. So like maybe in similar ways to Elon, um, he had a giant group of people who liked what he was doing or what
mhm,
they knew of what he was doing,
mhm,
and he was able to use that. And so he didn't really, he didn't do very much bribery or like, yeah, nothing actually illegal. Definitely morally questionable. I mean, he was a huge racist, and I guess like,
uh,
the things that he did
Robert
that
Moses.
were, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and like, so the things that yeah, the things that he did that were of questionable legality are like, using whatever that thing is that allows you to like displace people so that you can build a public project in the public good. Like he
Mhm,
obviously bulldozed over, poor communities, but he didn't like, yeah, he didn't have like OC on the payroll or
mhm,
rampant corruption. I mean, that's the thing he ran on. He never took a salary because he was independently wealthy. His family was wealthy. Um, he had no interest in money or access himself. And so like the people around him didn't, he didn't really have time for that kind of shit.
mhm,
So, it's like with anything, it's like none of these people are binary. None of them are all good or all bad. Like I think the question it brings is like, so our society, for better or worse, has lifted this person into like a stratosphere that is very far beyond. And like the questions that we reckon with are like, no one man should have all that power, right? Like
mhm,
that type of stuff is like, um we, for better or worse, at least at this time, we need great leaders, right? We need people who can uh, marshal the public support and angle us towards like a productive direction. We have not figured out a way to like run our society effectively in like a community decentralized grassroots way, which is one of the big appeals of crypto to me, is like maybe the things that we need to allow that to come back into fashion, um, are just better tools.
mhm,
And the tools can lay the groundwork for like the change in the mind that needs to happen for us to sort of bring governance and bring, the impetus back to like local decision making and community projects and that type of stuff.
mhm. Yeah. Um, I would say like one of like the modern failings currently of like the government is the dissolution of you know the dissolution of like proper consequence, but like the fact that power can be consolidated and very can be somewhat easily consolidated but not easily dismantled. um
Yeah.
and like I this is one of the things I'm kind of like wondering the direction that crypto is going to go in terms of like governance, in terms of, building out new societal structures.
Well, you're making me smile now because you're making me smile now because that's my thesis on proof of work versus proof of stake, right?
Uh-huh.
Like I think power is much easier to dismantle. Hash power, energy is much easier to dismantle than actual ownership.
Uh-huh.
It's like think about a corporation. Like if you own 60% of a corporation, there's nobody fucking telling you what to do. Now, you can make that corporation's value go to zero because people don't agree with what you're doing or whatever, but the system itself you control. Whereas, like, if you own the energy for the input to the system, well, somebody else can amass that energy unless you have a monopoly over the entire world's energy, which I think is pretty unlikely.
Hmm. So you're saying that, like, because you have access to, like, because you control the input, uh, you have more, like, tangibly, like, restricted,
It's
like,
easier to
ownership of.
dismantle
Uh-huh.
to what you were saying. Like I think it's yeah, I think it's easier, succinctly, like I just think it's easier to dismantle the power in, proof of work versus proof of stake, personally.
What would that be in kind of like in like existing structures, in existing, like say the, like, power in the US? Would that be like, you know if everybody had a solar panel, um then we would naturally be, like, less dependent the on gas companies, on like, big individual industries.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that to put it right because I feel like I'd find myself mixing metaphors quickly. I think it's
Uh-huh.
um, in some ways a little bit different thinking about like actual energy because like actual energy, um, at least like our electricities, they're like government sponsored monopolies. That's how America does it, right? In other
Hmm.
countries, it's like the state runs it, right? And so um, having like this sort of free market aspect to it is a little bit different. But I guess you could think about it like that, where it's like, um, you know, it's a little more painful and consequential right now because like think about it, it's like think about energy, think about gas specifically, right? So we just had a bunch of gas, the world's gas supply, like go offline, right?
Hmm.
Like Russia's gas is now, and it's creating all of these problems. Like Russia doesn't own the gas. Like technically, you know, the U.S. could reopen the Keystone pipeline, and Europe and them could start, like we can drill more gas out of the ground, but we can't do it immediately,
Yeah.
right? And I guess that's similar, but ultimately, like maybe it is a good analogy in that like we gave away too much of our autonomy,
Hmm.
or Europe specifically, to Russia and was not focused enough on cultivating their own resources. But that doesn't mean that like forever you know what I mean? Like Russia doesn't own all of the gas. They don't own all of the energy
Hmm.
in the world, right? Like people can build up the infrastructure to get more energy out of the ground. Now, obviously, there's considerations, climate change, and all these things, but they don't physically own it as if it was a corporation, and now they own the corporation, so nobody can do anything
Yeah,
about it.
and where, like, the barriers to entry were, like, impossible to, like, insurmount. It's just the fact that the infrastructure was not built already, and so, like, now,
Right.
in order to make up that, like, loss of the supply from
Right.
Russia, people would have to invest in the infrastructure, and, like, in the short term, that's also.
And it just is going to take time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Yeah, shit's whack right now. it, it
Yeah.
it very much feels
Yeah,
like
man. How
it very much feels kind of like a I don't know if anybody could have, like, wrote a like a sci-fi thing about it, but, like, it's like a weird new industrial age with that. It's not, like, about robots. It's not about just, like, making these urban dystopian cities. It's about, you know all of the power is now held in credit, and, like, I don't know. It's hard to see it as, like, a proper parallel to the Industrial Revolution, but it very much feels like this fundamental change in how people need to like reorganize their lives in order to actually suit their needs, because like
Right.
the existing structure does not work.
Right. I think it's also been so long since there's been a shakeup in the power structure.
Hmm.
And, that's like, I don't want to say it's a historical anomaly because you've had, people being the dominant power for millennia, right?
Hmm.
But I think that we're sort of at the apex of, hard to dismantle power. And so it's been clear for some time that things are about to change. And it's like that old adage of like, there's decades that happen in a year and years that happen in decades, right? Um, and I think we're just in that transitional period where it's like
2020s.
all of this, right? All of this centralized power, all of this U.S. controlling the world, all of these, uh, you know, base assumptions that we've all been operating under are changing, and we don't know how that's going to shake out. It could shake out really, really horribly, and unfortunately, already is, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I heard something really interesting. I've been listening to a lot more like finance and economics podcasts, and seems intuitive after you hear it, but like people talk about income inequality, right? Like
Hmm.
that's one of the defining characteristics of like, hey, shit is about to break, right? Society will not stand for a certain level of income inequality. This has been like over the long wheel of history, happened time and time again.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, I personally fell into the camp of people who thought like the way that income inequality gets solved is that like, ideally like you maybe tax the rich and everybody gets richer and then the gap uh, closes, right?
Hmm.
It comes from the bottom up. But there's never actually been an example of that. It's always been inflation or war or whatever pushes the top down, and and then everybody sort of gets balanced, and then it builds up over time. People start building up together because there's more, people are starting from a more similar footing because it's much easier to grow your wealth when you have wealth, right?
Yeah.
So like you the as the it's like a perpetuating cycle. Like the further the income inequality is, the worse it gets, right?
Hmm.
And then it sort of gets pushed down, and then everybody rises together, and then slowly, and that's just like
Uh-huh.
the story of humanity, right? But I thought that was really interesting, because it's like inflation. We think about inflation, or at least I did, as like something that hurts like everyday people, and it does. There's no arguments about it, but like the cycle of inflation, it's really bad for people because it's hurting their everyday purchasing power, but eventually it leads to wages, and really where it happens is like ownership gets crushed. The
Hmm.
people who own all the inputs, all of these things get more expensive, and the margins get thinner for all of the people who are the wealthy, are the people who control things or who own everything, right?
Hmm.
And they're the ones who get it the worst, like over the long tail of the cycle, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, between like the 60s and like the 2000s, uh like I don't remember what year. I think it was like the 50s to 2000s, but like the marginal tax rate for like the marginal highest tax rate was like 90%, 70 to 90%. And
Hmm.
would you consider that being like as a result of like the Cold War kind of pushing down the top?
Um, Yeah, I guess I don't know enough about that period. I think part of it seems to me like maybe U.S. tax policy and the ability for the federal government, like the kind of control the federal government had over the entire United States,
Hmm.
was probably much different in the early 1900s than it was post World War II, where the federal government had ballooned to this massive size, most powerful country in the world for the first time, like definitively bar none, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the state capacity was at an all-time high, and so its ability to extract rent from its uh, citizens, even the wealthy ones who could push back,
Mm-hmm.
was probably higher. And so maybe that's kind of the reason. And then slowly those people figured out how to weasel their way into power. And, because you can't flip a switch overnight,
Yeah.
right? Like if the state's super powerful, puts the shit in, you gotta, as the fucking robber baron, you gotta plant your seeds that grow in 20 or 30 years. I mean, these people build dynasties. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe that has something to do with it. Uh, and now like state capacity feels like relatively low, because not because our government isn't giant and bloated, but mostly because it's unpopular. You know,
Yeah,
it's
it's
very hard for the state to.
the,
Go ahead.
the
Sorry.
the state's role is very much shifted away from like actually improving the lives of the individual citizens and more towards like protecting businesses and investment opportunities. Um, and I don't know how much
Mhm.
of that has been
Because
is
the
like
citizens can't agree.
yeah. Well, I mean
You know,
that's the thing. Citizens agree on most of the thing on like a lot of topics. 60%, 70%
right.
are like pro-choice, pro like gun, pro gun control, pro healthcare. Um,
Hmm.
but like the big fear is always like we're going to lose people being interested in the US if we start regulating things. And we're already exporting so many of our jobs. We're already, we're no longer a
Right.
the manufacturing powerhouse that we were in the 20th century. Like we are like an idea place, but
Yeah, I think
like at this point, how much are these ideas worth if the consequence is, people are dying of like preventable diseases and you know getting lead poisoning
yeah,
from
and school
water.
shootings and all of that.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's also like our electoral system, our democracy doesn't like really reflect uh, demographics and where people live and all of these things. So you have like, your vote in one state, in one county is worth infinitely more than your vote in another state in
Hmm.
another county. Um, and that shit I certainly don't have an answer for. I think that like to your point of we the state has turned into this like proxy for like protecting business interests. I think that's because it's like the last thing that we can grab onto. Like our power abroad comes from like two things: our military and the fact that the of the 100 most powerful corporations in the world, like a stupid percentage of them are American corporations, right?
Hmm.
uh, and so, and I would argue that like the military power, I mean, I guess Russia's not as much as we thought, but like, without the corporations, the military power is a lot of like ready, fire, aim, I guess. Like
Hmm.
if you're exerting force over people, but you don't have the infrastructure to like manifest the gains of that force, like, you know, it, it's not really worth a lot.
Yeah, this is a like a recurring thing that I've been discussing with my wife in Ukraine, at least in like regards to Russia and like the history of like the Soviet Union. Like
Hmm.
while they were like building up their space program, when they first launched a person into space into orbit, like the average person in Russia did not have toilet paper. They were still like
Wow.
yeah, um, they were still either just like washing or like wiping with like leaves and grass. Um, and like right
That's
now,
crazy.
like Russia's got capital, but their entire like model, their entire international like export system is based on like metals and gas. And those are all like under
Yeah.
specific oligarchs,
The
and
right. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get, you know, uh, you need bureaucracy to run, especially in a country with so much state planning. You need bureaucracy. You need effective middle management to like do anything beyond raw commodities. Like if you want to get into engineering and ideas based work, um, you need that kind of culture and that kind of workforce, and that kind of workforce doesn't gel well with like, an authoritarian state,
Hmm.
because those people tend to get ideas and they want more for themselves, and blah blah blah. So it's sort of like yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a cost of doing that business in that way, I guess.
I'd say one of the strangest things that I've kind of been noticing, I guess, in the last 10 years in terms of like elections, the world has been gravitating more towards strongmen and like right wing, like insane people, and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yep.
this is like specifically Ukraine, but also like different places in Europe still have royals, and there's a lot of people who are like still perfectly fine with like a monarchical structure or like trained elites or
Mm-hmm.
nobles. In China, the average person doesn't think about the fact that they don't need to vote or that they don't vote because there are educated politicians that are made to do that. And I don't know how much of this is like
Right.
a flaw of democracy in the sense that, you know, I think this is something that Ariana was talking about before, but like the average person doesn't actually give a shit about, our foreign policy. The average person doesn't give a shit about, real wages. It's just, how am I getting food on the table
Mm-hmm.
and how am I, are my kids going to be able to live a better life than I did? And that is it's a
Right.
very surface level thing. And so like how much, yeah, yes, we shouldn't like put power into like one thing, into like a family that can't be dismantled anymore, or a dictator that can co-opt all the branches of government. But at the same time, like the rotating presidency of like flip-flopping ideas that people don't actively understand or seek really to understand. um I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering how much.
Well, and it's
Yeah, all right, sorry, go on.
go ahead. No, no, no. Finish your thought.
I'm just wondering if like there is an alternative to, I guess not an alternative to democracy, but like what ways do we need to like refine it so that the individual is more actively invested, um, without it having to be like this game of just like pandering to different like single political positions, single issue voters and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. I I think that my opinion on that question is uh, i- the only answer that makes any sense to me, and it's an imperfect one, is just that there has to be a refocus on things that are smaller and closer to home.
Hmm.
Like,
States'
people
rights.
do not have the bandwidth. Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously there are all kinds of problems when you kind of reorganize in that way. And I think that, you don't immediately ping pong or whatever, but it
Hmm.
seems to me that like that type of refocusing on things that people can see and whatnot is like, it's part of the cycle. It's part of the natural, like,
Hmm.
the I'm a big like trend person, right? And it's like
Trendy.
we had this trend which was bigger, 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 bigger. We got to the
Hmm.
like maximum point of globalization. Okay, now we see all the bad things with that. We need to sort of move backwards and hopefully find like a balanced medium. And probably we will go too far back the other direction, and then back and back, and hopefully the long bend of history of this balancing and rebalancing is upward and not towards total Armageddon, like if you're an optimist. um because it's like, even to that point you were mentioning about like just like what people uh you know vote on or care about, or like this idea that in some countries they're totally fine because they feel they have an educated class of elites making decisions for them.
Hmm.
Well, the flip side of that coin is Twitter, where everybody thinks that they have an educated opinion, and there's no hierarchy of whose opinions matter, and it's
Depth of
just everybody
expertise.
shouting into a void. And the types of people who that kind of chaotic environment appeal to, or the people who rise up, are a lot of times strong men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because they can marshal the populist sentiment of the masses, and they can, generalize and just fucking run roughshod through aggression over people, and there's a big market for that. And because of the aggression, people are, most people, normal people, don't want to speak out against that because they don't want to fight. They just want to fucking feed their family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, on both sides of the spectrum, you have this same, but different issue, right? And it's, yeah, I don't know. It's trying to trend towards the middle. I guess I outed myself as a centrist, but it's like, I think that, yeah, the trend now to me, is trying to figure out ways that we can get some of the good that comes from more localized thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and the least amount of the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, if your localized thought is that, like, women shouldn't be able to have abortions and that gay people are bad and shit, like, the, there are protections against that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, the balance, I mean, that's kind of the problem with democracy, is like, if a bunch of people vote for Nazis, that's democratic,
Yeah.
like, it's
Yeah, I guess like one of the big problem, like the big issues with democracy becomes scalability. And this is,
right.
you're right, where like you know, after you're out of your community, after you're out of your family unit, it gets more and more like, why do I need to give a shit about this?
Right.
Um,
And the only unfortunate way to get things done is compromise. I mean, that's why, that's like
well, hold
the
up. There's also violent insurrection and revolutions,
yeah,
which
for
definitely,
sure.
which I feel like sentiment towards that has been has definitely been growing. The whole like there has been a lot more of like the like we should definitely be eating the rich. There's a lot of that that's been going along the
Hmm.
last couple of years, um, and especially with like Black Lives Matter, with a lot of just trying to correct for the wealth gap. Um, I don't know. It seems like for like large institutional change, it seldom seems like there's ever been like anything where incrementalism has been the better solution. I don't know. I can't even really say that either. But like civil rights movement,
Yeah.
labor
Yeah, I
movement.
mean, it's right. But it's like, I don't know. It's like balance again, because it's like, it's easy to say after some of these revolutions took place that they were good, but then you have to be okay with the carnage that comes
Yeah,
with
that's true.
some of them, right? And the instability and the decades long, rebalancing period to, like, the new, improved normal. And we have not, as a species, figured out a way to, make the revolution period, uh, less. And maybe it just can't be, and that's sort of the thing that people have to sign up for. And I guess my problem with, like, people who talk too revolutionary is that, like, push come to shove, and they're really seeing, like, what the revolution, looks like up close. They're like, fuck no, I don't want any part of that,
Hmm.
so I think that, to go to the revolutionary point, like, I think some of the revolution stuff is made easier. Some of the transition is made easier if local infrastructure is built out, right?
Hmm.
If you're not so reliant, like right now, we are so reliant on these giant centralized forces, that to think that we could overnight, cause some sea change, there would be a massive power vacuum. These forces would be grabbed, or they would go to waste, and then people would suffer hugely because of them. So it's like, we need to, like, build out, infrastructure for alternatives as much as we can,
Hmm.
first. And I feel like in some ways that's happening. And again, that is one of the big things that crypto appeals to me. Like when you talk about DAOs, it's not just like, oh, I can start an LLC for my small business with less overhead and red tape. It's also like I can, once the tooling and utility improves, like I can start up, an organizational structure for my community, for my group of like-minded individuals that can help us take care of each other,
Mm-hmm.
um, and share ideas in a way that was not like it wasn't quite available to me in the same way, because like it was happening on these centralized owned platforms. Um, and there's good and bad to that, because that same argument works for good people and it works for bad people too.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I wanted to ask. So, one was about your fun fact that you sent to me. You're brought into this world with a vacuum.
Yeah.
Explain.
Yeah. I didn't want to come out of my mom, so they had to suck me out with a vacuum. And I had like a Smurf head when I was born. I didn't realize that that's the thing that they actually do, but it is the thing that they do. They have a little vacuum, and for babies that don't want to come out, boom,
Cesarean
suck
wasn't
you
an
out with the
option,
vacuum.
and they went with the dry vac.
I think I was probably far enough. I mean, I definitely did not dig into detail with my mom about exactly how it went down.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that like part of me was out and the rest of me was like not wanting to come out or
Mm-hmm.
something. And so they put the little suction cup on my head and sucked me out with the vacuum.
Interesting. I would have been terrified for whoever was the first person that like, okay, I'm going to suggest this, and it's going to sound stupid, but bear with me.
Well, and it's because your head is so soft.
Yeah, but the
when you're
neck is
a
also
baby.
so
It's
weak,
like I had
isn't
a
it?
Smurf head. Like, yes, that too. I mean, they're like supporting the neck and stuff, but any amount of pressure you put on the head, it's like the blood rushed to my head, and my head was like, I think that's why my head's bean shaped the way it is. But yeah, my head was blue, and it was
Dabba B,
I
dabba
guess a
die.
traumatic way, but it didn't feel traumatic. I don't feel like I have like a genesis trauma that I'm slowly trying to unpack.
Uh-huh.
My unwillingness to come into the world. But yeah, that's the story of that. Man, on the topic of soft baby heads, I met my friend's child for the first time.
Ah.
I met my friend's child for the first time last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't know. I've been traveling a lot, and yeah, I mean, he's like 4 months old, and he's still like his head. He's like, dude, you gotta check this out. Poke right here, and it's like soft part of his baby's head that's just like hasn't hardened yet, and that's just like totally normal. Crazy.
I wonder how much you could like. Could you
You don't
massage
have kids, do you?
No, not yet. Maybe not ever, but I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
I wonder how much you could massage a baby's head and like shape it in like a way that you would prefer.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, they do that, right? Isn't that like a thing that like
I know there are
in
baby massages.
old like indigenous, but like in indigenous cultures or whatever, like that they would have like babies who would be born a certain way or under certain circumstances that were going to be like shamans or whatever. They would like shape their heads.
I had never heard about this.
They would like put like molding things onto their heads. Yeah, in some, I feel like it was South American or something. I read about it once, but yeah, so you can technically mold the head. I don't know exactly to what degree, but
or if it would be beneficial or detrimental.
body mods.
Yeah.
Probably detrimental. Probably.
And your other fun fact: for a long time, you thought you were the only person who could hear toilets flush.
Yeah.
Is that egocentrism?
When I was a kid, I guess I was just a weird kid. I was destined to be a weird kid. I just thought that when I was young, and I could still remember this very vividly, I thought the sound of a toilet flushing was so freaking bizarre and terrifying that like the fact that nobody reacted to it meant that nobody could hear it. That's like what that was the reasoning my child brain had. And I remember one day I flushed the toilet and I asked my mom, I'm like, can you hear that sound? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And then I realized that, oh, yes, they can. Just nobody reacts to it. And then
she gave you the weird look and so said, what sound?
Yeah.
Gaslighting children, one of the best pastimes of the last 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the gifts of being a parenthood is gaslighting your children. So how long are you in town?
I'm here until next Saturday, I believe. Flight's out on the 18th. Right now, I'm trying to figure out some.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out like getting some humanitarian aid on my way back. Trying to get some water purification
Mm-hmm.
packets.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So how is your situation in Lviv? Do you have a I thought you mentioned you had some relatives of your wife's living with you. Is that's still the case or?
now, so we do live in Lviv. Kate's my wife's aunt stayed with us briefly. Her aunt, uncle, and cousin stayed with us briefly, but they got an apartment that relatively close by. She still has family in
Mm.
my wife still has family in one of the occupied cities in southern Ukraine, and so we're trying to send them supplies and
Wow.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weird situation. Family stuff has definitely been coming up a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and just like kind of figuring out what is like the importance of the family unit, and then like also like these ideas of nationalism uh, that have been coming out as a result of
Mm-hmm.
the invasion, because one of the fascinating things has just been like how many of the
Yeah.
cities were like, not necessarily pro-Russian, but they were like welcoming to Russians. Like there were a lot of cities that are generally like a lot of the tourists that would go to them were Russians, and now those places are also now universally like, man,
Right.
fuck Russia, get out of here. We don't want anything to do with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'd heard that where it's like the Ukrainian national identity has like leaps and bounds been unified from where it was just like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just people in a country, right?
Yeah, and there are
Yeah.
some things that I'm not happy about people being united around. Like right now, like the current president, I'm glad he hasn't run away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad he isn't like in an active detriment to the efforts, the military efforts. But at the same time, like prior to the invasion and the war, he wasn't a good president. He wasn't doing things actively in the interest of Ukraine. And so,
Yeah.
after the whole hot period of the war, it's a big question as to like what's going to be how well are we're going to be able to attract foreign partners to reinvest in Ukraine, um, and what direction like
Mm-hmm.
the political landscape is going to move, because like this guy is still, I don't know if he's still actively trying to put up or like he's actively putting like the previous president on trial for different forms of like tax evasion and shit, which is just like incredibly petty. So
Mm. Right.
unrelated diatribes.
Yeah. I mean, I no, I mean it's I don't know. It's sort of at the center of everything. Uh, at least in my world, it's like what happens in Ukraine determines like where society is going for the next like 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
I mean, a lot
personally,
of the things are trends that are happening anyway. But like, go ahead. Sorry.
personally, like I would view like the potential of Ukraine coming out of this victorious. It's like it's positioned to be like the next Germany or like the next Japan, in terms of the amount
Mm-hmm.
of IT expertise located within Ukraine, the amount of land space,
Right.
and just like excellent arable land, the amount of like nuclear power stations that are in Ukraine. It's very much like set to be one of like the
Right.
new significant hubs of like the modern era, and a
Yeah.
lot of that depends on what happens with like this also previously very corrupt government. Um, my hope would be that like
Mm-hmm.
because of like a more broad public eye, people actually now know where Ukraine is. Not most people, but I would say generally speaking,
Right.
more people know where Ukraine is. That there is a lot of
Right.
opportunity that's on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's man. It's like obviously you're super close to it, so you can, think about it, but it's hard for me to even conceptualize what it can look like on the other side, just not knowing how long it can last. And also, like, to me, it's like very clear that, obviously Ukraine becomes of huge strategic importance to, the rest of the world, especially like Europe and the West. But then you have this like force of like, okay, if Russia backs off, predicated on some deal that, NATO's not going to expand or whatever, they make
Hmm.
some sort of concessions to him to end the war, and like possibly, to try to stave off a global famine. um you know what does that mean for reinvestment, right? Because like our reinvestment seen as like reigniting tensions and all of those types of things.
Hmm.
It's sticky, but
Yeah,
um
I mean,
yeah,
a lot
go
of
ahead.
people in Ukraine see Russia as like, if 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 Putin's like presidency is not liquidated, and like pretty much everybody in power like held like it's actually brought before like a Nuremberg trial sort of thing. Um, it's not really a matter of just like, bringing things back to where they were. It's a question of like preventing the next war, because at that point, if they are not dissolved and like justice be brought to today,
Yeah,
but then it's just like waiting again for the next insane strongman to try to like nuke the world again. And like I don't know how much of
hmm,
like correcting culture there needs to be, but where everybody kind of is hoping that the situation with Russia, and like Putinism specifically, they're kind of hope everybody's kind of hoping for the dissolution of the Nazis after World War II, where
right, yeah. Yeah, I
people
mean,
were
it's kind of
forced to
like,
learn about that history.
oh, sorry.
People were forced to correct the misinformation that they had been putting out, that they had been learning, that they'd been brainwashed with, and there are going to be people who are like holding on to that. But like the re-education of an entire like massive culture is just like I don't know what that how that
Right.
it could happen like in a feasible, you know.
Yeah, and you think, and it's like, I never really thought about the parallels, but it's like you have this like uh Cold War era Russia. You can think about that as like World War I era Germany, and
Hmm.
then the corrective, like punitive measures that were levied against Germany, and not in the same way, but similarly in Russia, that allowed the oligarchs to rise to power, sort of created the preconditions for World War II, created the preconditions for what we're seeing
Hmm.
today. But it played out over such a longer period of time than it did in the early 19th century, or 20th century, that it's like, yeah, it's hard to think about how that changes, you know, um, changes things.
Especially because a lot of the the way information is dispersed now, um, correcting so many of the
Hmm.
airwaves, especially with like bot farms and troll farms and just like misinformation farms that Russia has actively been seeding in so many other countries, and have been like setting up like call centers in these various other places to fight this misinformation war. Like correcting that um, will be
Hmm.
a very like big question about
Yeah,
like
I
the
mean,
way
I
technology
think
is able
that
to
this
correct
winter,
itself. Yeah, sorry, go on.
right? I think this I think this winter is going to be, you know, where the rubber meets the road, when like a lot of these shortages really start to, to bear. And as Europe needs the gas to heat their homes in the winter and stuff, that's when like the West's political uh, support will be tested.
Hmm.
Um, obviously Russia can't hold out forever, but you know, I feel like my I'm definitely I'm hugely I've always been like really interested in Russia, just like Russian literature and art, and just the history of the country is fascinating.
Hmm.
But it's like you think about like Stalingrad, like they're willing to sacrifice a lot of their people and go super super far, you know.
Hmm.
So I don't know how long that lasts, but um, yeah, I'm I don't know. It's like
I'm trying to stay optimistic.
I'm the more right. Yeah. No. I mean, I'm definitely optimistic. Uh, you know, too, and I think that like the most moving thing I may have ever seen is like how the Ukrainian people have responded to this. You know,
Lots
where
of
it's like,
Russians go fuck yourself.
yeah,
I'm glad it's not the like silly like little sayings and more about just you know what, just go fuck yourself. How about just go fuck
yeah,
yourself? We don't need to
yeah.
do marketing.
Just go fuck yourself. Yeah.
Um, one thing. So to return to our beginning conversation, something that I've never gotten any information about, and I'm curious about, why? What is Throwback? Because that's not your last name, and that's not like.
Yeah. So I got really interested in this scientist, Claude Shannon. He's the founder of information theory.
Mhm,
So like bits and bytes, basically. It's like a unified field theory for communication, something that we take for granted, but it's like the foundation of computer science and like
mhm,
the way information operates currently. And he did that a couple times. He did that for like switches, like electrical systems.
mhm,
He applied Boolean logic to electrical systems, which like seems super like duh in retrospect, but nobody was had been thinking that way. And both of his inventions, or his most famous ones, information theory and that, were kind of that way where it's like he just like through math like saw this thing, and then it was like so obvious after he said it that everyone was like, "Oh my god," you know what I mean? And it spawned these huge, technology revolutions. And to me, that's like the highest, form of creativity and
mhm.
thought is like being able to like
Reveal
see something
something.
that's immediately
Yeah,
obvious
yeah.
to right. And he was also just like a really quirky dude, like a master clarinet player, loved jazz, and like he made these two seminal discoveries in like the early part of his career. Like the one was in his early 20s, and then the information theory was early 30s. And he worked at Bell Labs during World War II and shit. And then basically kind of fucked off. Like he was like a professor emeritus at MIT,
Mhm,
and just like was not interested at all in acclaim or in like the things that go with being like a world renowned Einstein level scientist. He
mhm,
just like followed his interests, and so he was like really into juggling and unicycling and like had all these weird quirky inventions that he was making in the back half of his career, and one of them was called the thrifty Roman numeral backwards adjusting calculator, or throwback for
huh.
short. And I thought that was had a ring to it, so I picked that.
What was this guy's name again?
Claude Shannon.
Claude Shannon. I'm surprised I've never heard of him. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Dope. We're getting close
Yeah,
to time. At least I'm getting close to time for like this room that I'm borrowing for this podcast. um,
sure.
anything you've
Yeah.
been anything that you have coming out soon that you kind of want to plug or a website? I put your Twitter on the thing. It's at Throwback Kevin.
Um, yeah, I mean the third episode of Validator Roadmap is coming out probably in a couple weeks.
Oh, dope.
But yeah, outside of that, I'm pretty heads down right now. I'm really excited about it. It's been like a just an insane first half of this year with a lot of personal and travel and professional things. And now I've got like this 11-week uh, open field in front of me in the summer. We have a little event space here in Chicago called the Birdhouse.
Hmm.
So we're gonna be doing events there, and I'm just gonna be staying put, doing a lot of learning. And I'm fortunate enough that at least for the next 11 weeks, I govern my time. So planning to put that to good use, hopefully. It feels like a pretty good spot to be in. I'm really grateful for it.
Dope. All right. So this has been our Mochi Podcast, episode 26, with Kevin McMahon of Throbac Labs. Kevin, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
It's great talking to you.
And if you find yourself in Chicago, you should make your way to the Birdhouse.
I'll try to be there sometime this coming week, I believe. Yeah. I'll definitely let you know when we're coming by.
Cool. That'd be great.
All right. Our Mochi Podcast, episode 26.
Right.
Adios.
Bye-bye.